Philip II is dead, assassinated. The suspect's probably the one standing closest to his body. Alexander is Philip's oldest son, but he's not just automatically going to inherit the throne. In Macedon, you don't just get the crown. Alexander is inheriting a situation. Let's say 10 things were in Alexander's inheritance, some gifts, some curses. But to understand Alexander's journey, you've got to understand his starting line. This lesson will show you the 10 things that Alexander inherited before he launches into world conquest. I'm Mr. Hull, and this is Ancient History. Welcome to Classical Kingdoms, where timeless stories reveal truth and wisdom for your journey with Alexander the Great and the 10 items he inherited. This is lesson number 39 in your Ancient History course. Last time Philip II was bleeding out on the theater floor. It totally changed the world. Alexander is only 20 years old as he stands over his father's body. How does he move into power? Alexander's often called a god, a genius. He's not called great yet. Alexander is a part of history now. It's not magic. It's really mechanics, if he can pull it off. So let's inspect what he was given. Let's learn these 10 items. It's really hardware, it's software, and it's also about the money and the debts. So get your notebooks ready to number 1 through 10 as we learn the inventory of history's greatest inheritance. And this will level you up so that you can truly appreciate the situation Alexander is in as he sets off to conquer the world. Number 1, the war chest, or more accurately, the almost empty war chest, empty box. You assume that kings are so wealthy. We imagine gold is piled up to the ceilings. Here is the shock. The textbooks have left this out. When Alexander takes this power in 336 BC, the Macedonian state was effectively bankrupt. Look at the balance sheet. He inherited about 60 talents. Sounds like a lot. 1 talent is like a month of running a warship. It's 6,000 daily wages. But 60 talents up against a debt, a national debt of 500 talents? Why? What was Philip spending money on? Philip didn't expect that he was going to be killed so soon. Philip was investing for the future. He spent 20 years bribing Greek politicians, hiring mercenary fighters, the best that money could buy. And Philip was buying power with borrowed money. And now Alexander inherits the bill, the debt. There is some cash flow, but the math is terrifying. The army burns through about 20 talents per day for wages, supplies, and you've only got 20 talents in the bank. You spend 60 talents in the bank, and you spend 20. That's like 3 days cash reserve. It's like you inherit it. You're the favorite son, and you inherit a sports car, Ferrari. But no way to pay for money. No money, no gas money, no insurance money. The situation he inherited does include some of the mines at Pan-Hellenic. This gold factory brings 1,000 talents of gold annually. Better than Athens, the Athens silver mines, better than those at the peak. But the mining takes time, digging and smelting, stamping, all this war costs money now. And there's going to be a battle for the throne, this financial precipice. dictated the Persian invasion strategy. In other words, going to fight is one of the ways to gain some more money. Alexander can't afford to defend his territory. He needs to go and invade. So it makes sense. Can't afford to sit. He needs to attack as quickly as possible. Attack and seize the treasuries at Sardis and all the way to Susa. Or he risks the Macedonian government collapsing and going broke. Number 2, the siege engineers. He is inheriting equivalent of the Manhattan Project of military invention and innovation. What is the Manhattan Project? That was the code name as the United States was developing the most advanced, game-changing, war-changing weapon, the atomic bomb, the Manhattan Project. So now Alexander's not inheriting an atomic bomb, but he does have some incredible engineers with siege war machines. Because if you can take a walled city, surround it, and lay siege on it, you can use starvation as a weapon. You could just sit outside for a year. Like, remember the Trojan War lesson, 25. That's 10 years sitting outside. Philip II hated waiting. He assembled a dream team of engineers from Thessaly and Pella. Diodes of Pella got the nickname Besieger. So this is an incredible team of engineers to invent the Macedonian torsion catapult. New invention. Old catapults were like big bows, but this is engineered replacing the bow now with tightly twisted animal sinew. Human hair, so like braiding this together and then so strong like rope, except that it's got some play to it, some spring. And catapults, think more like what you see pictured here. The gastrofete is a belly shooter, and the word catapult means skin penetrator, like the word pelt. And so they can just tighten this thing. There's so much tension, like a rubber band, but it won't break. When you release it, it's explosive, and they could scale these. They could build them on site. This picture of this big one, it is actually to scale. They had a math formula that involved the square root of 100 times the shot weight. That was the amount of spring that was necessary, 1.1 times the square root of 100 times the shot weight. So now you know the formula, but this is brilliant math and allowed them to build these identical machines as they go into position. So you don't have to wheel them on your invasions. This is the first time artillery could shatter masonry from a quarter mile away, over 1,000 feet, like what you see here. And this ended the age of impregnable city-state walls. Imagine that you're the king of Tyre. He's going to be worried, because we'll get to that battle in the next lesson. But you've got 150-foot walls. You think you're safe. You're way out in off the shore a little bit. So remember the city-state of Tyre, because this becomes a game changer. So Alexander inherits the Manhattan Project of ancient Macedonia. Stronger, better catapults that are going to wreak havoc on what we used to think were very safe defensive walls. Number 3 is the ultimate weapon, the world's first true combined armed system. Most ancient armies were mobs. Now you've learned the phalanx, as the Greeks could overlap their shields. They could push from behind. It was a big block, a wall, impregnable wall of men. But Alexander inherited a military machine that had been trained by his father, copied the best from the Greeks, and then improved it. The concept he used was the hammer and anvil. The anvil was the phalanx. So picture an anvil, and then what do you do with the anvil? You hammer on top of it. The anvil is the phalanx 16 ranks deep. This formation is now deeper, and the sarissa could be up to 18 feet long, 16 to 18 feet long. So that means the guy in the third row is still pointing his long spear in front of the first row. So do a little bit of math in a classroom setting. Somebody in the back of the classroom is holding a spike that could get past the front row of desks. But every other row in between also has this spike. How are you going to penetrate the Macedonian phalanx? This is incredible. These pikes, these sarissa, are dense cornel wood. The wall of spikes no enemy could approach. It's the porcupine of death. Alexander has inherited it. But that's the anvil. What are we going to hammer on top? The hammer is the cavalry. If you remember Alexander helping his father at Thebes run the cavalry, the companion cavalry are the aristocrats, the horse riders, the friends of the king, and Philip taught them the flying wedge, a triangle with the king at the tip. It's a chisel. It's like splitting rock. We are not a mob anymore. These military formations, the training to get them ready, is a highly synchronized system. The infantry can pin you down. The cavalry will break your spine. This gave Alexander a solution for every military problem. And we'll see it in action very soon in the next lesson as Alexander tries to take over the world. But he's inherited this optimal, new, innovative military machine. Number 4, he's inheriting intellectual capital. That was hardware, but now it's also software because of the brain power. Now, you've already heard smart things with the engineers, the improvements to the military, but he is inheriting the mindset of the king. You know that from age 13 to 16, Alexander left the palace, went to Mieza, the temple of the nymphs, and his tutor was Aristotle. Aristotle, you've heard of Aristotle, the golden mean, the ethics. Alexander inherited the very best education that money could buy. Medicine, biology, zoology, ethics. He received the casket copy of the Iliad. He kept it in a box. The box that he carried around with him, a fancy box, sort of like this one. But that casket copy of the Iliad had annotations from Aristotle. You know that Aristotle wasn't a cheap tutor. He was the smartest man in the world at the time, and all Philip had to do to pay for this education was to rebuild his home city. You heard details about Aristotle's education back in lesson number 38. Now, Aristotle's the smartest man in the world. He wasn't perfect. Alexander inherited some mistakes. Alexander realized that Aristotle doesn't know everything. You know that he taught that the Indus River might connect to the Nile River because they both had crocodiles. He taught that the ocean, the edge of the flat earth, was just beyond India. Alexander didn't invade India just to conquer. He actually invaded to verify his teacher's map. It's a military experiment to find the end of the world. This education instilled observation, empirical observation. Remember, empirical, he's going to use his senses, he's going to measure. Gave him a scientific mind. But more importantly, he was taught megalopsychia. Megalopsychia, the Greek word for great soul, great thinking, magnanimity, that it created the king mindset with a half scientist built in there too. He's inheriting a very unusual ability to have greatness and to know what to do with it thanks to Aristotle's education. Number 5, Alexander inherits the old guard. What is the old guard? These are the military staff of Philip II. Now, what kind of inheritance is that? Is that a gift or is it a curse? Remember, he's only 20 years old. And these trusted military generals are, 60, and they need to manage this young kid. Or are they even loyal to this young kid? They were loyal to father. They fought for Philip II. They may not respect Alexander just yet. He has inherited the old guard. Parmenion was the primary figure, a legend controlling the army's left wing. For that hammer and anvil, his power was terrifying. He had a son in the companion cavalry. He had a brother in the light cavalry. He had another son that led another military formation. So Parmenion has his own army, kind of, in a sense. If he snaps his finger, Alexander could be gone. Another figure, Antipater, iron-fisted viceroy, is left behind to manage Macedon and the conquered lands in Europe, still loyal to Philip. Will he be loyal to Alexander? This inheritance is an uncertainty. The wisdom in this group of the old guard, it did provide some ballast, some strength. They stopped the rookie mistakes, but they were really a ticking time bomb of factionalism. What is factionalism? The factions within your administration, your power base, these factions, there's tension there. There could be betrayal. The tension between the old guard's caution and Alexander's ambition defines the situation of his inheritance here with the old guard. And eventually, Alexander is going to have to kill these guys in order to truly become the king. Number 6, the forced alliance. Legally, he inherited a piece of paper, and that was the Constitution of the League of Corinth. In 337 BC, Philip established the League of Corinth. This was the new league. We've done it again. Do you remember back in the struggles, even back to the golden age of Athens, when the Delian League provided Athens power and wealth? Well, Philip learned from that. The League of Corinth is what binds these Greek city-states together, except for Sparta. Sparta's out. Philip is dead now, and the Greeks thought that they were free. So what does Alexander have to do with this part of the inheritance? He has to march south, and he has to remind the city-states that they are not out of the Corinthian League, the League of Corinth. He compelled the council to elect him to 2 titles. First, hegemon. Hegemon. What is a hegemon? He's the supreme leader, the civil leader. The second title that he demanded was strategos. Strategos is like the word strategy. It's the Greek word for general. This gives him commander-in-chief powers. He doesn't have to have a vote on strategy. He gives the orders. The League provides 7,000 Greek infantry, 600 cavalry. That's not huge. 7,000 is not huge. It serves an actual dark purpose. Remember that Philip was once a 15-year-old hostage. These 7,000 Greek infantry are hostages. So by taking the very best young men of Athens and Thebes, Corinth, and bringing them along on this journey to invade Asia, he ensures that the Greek fathers back home are not going to rebel against Alexander. This gave Alexander the legal mandate. So when Thebes rebels in 335 BC, Alexander didn't just burn Thebes down. He convenes the league and had the other Greeks vote to destroy Thebes. He used his father's legal framework to wash his hands of the situation, essentially making the other Greek city-states the ones who did in Thebes. It's kind of a masterclass in weaponized law, but Alexander inherited it, and that's what he did. Let's recap what he's inherited so far. The money, barely enough, the engineering, the tactical system, his education from Aristotle, the generals of the old guard, and now the legal contracts. What's next? Number 7, it's going to be some motivation. And it's going to be something you've heard of before. Across all of Greece, if you go way back to lesson 32, remember that they were invaded by Persia. Let's call this Pan-Hellenic vengeance. Number 7, it's a reason to invade Persia. He inherited a reason to invade Persia. For 150 years, the Greeks have wanted to invade Persia, to get them back, to revenge. In 480 BC, you know that Xerxes burned the temples of Athens. Alexander sold this as a holy crusade, a war, to punish the barbarians. He operationalized this whole message. And after his first victory in this invasion, he collected 300 suits of Persian armor, shipped them back to Athens, and hung them in the Parthenon. Why would he do that? Why is he putting up armor? He inscribed the words, Alexander, son of Philip, and the Greeks, except not the Spartans, took this from the barbarians dwelling in Asia. This is huge. This is incredible messaging. It's marketing. You see that in today's world. It's unbelievably important. But they didn't have social media back then, so they put the armor with the messages in the temple where everybody goes, and they remind you it's not the Spartans, kind of shaming Sparta. And just as a side note, you know we're kind of done talking about Sparta? And a little bit of Athens too. So Alexander is changing a lot here, but I digress. You'll get to that in future lessons. It's a transformation of the Macedonian-led land grab and calling it a holy war and revenge from 150 years ago. And it justifies everything, especially if he can make it all the way to the Persian capital. What do you think he's going to do to it? Alexander claims that that will be the final act of vengeance. And people are fired up to make that happen. Closes a loop that his father had actually opened. They were planning to do this all along. Let's move on. Number 8, the divine myth. He inherited a divine myth. You know, modern legitimacy, what is legitimacy? You know, if you're the legitimate ruler, you know, in our republic, we elect, we vote. But in ancient times, legitimacy, maybe you would expect it comes through blood, comes through your parents, that you're born into this power. Born into it, who are your parents? Philip and Olympias. Philip had more than one wife, but Olympias claimed to have been zapped with lightning, that Zeus was really the father. You know, Olympias claimed to be a descendant through a bloodline of Achilles. And Olympias gives this message to her son Alexander. Now, Philip actually claims descension from Heracles. And this is a dynasty of dual heroic lineage. Now, you're going to see this a lot. It offers legitimacy and power. So Alexander grows up believing that his ancestors are amongst the strongest men, the greatest warriors who have ever lived, with divine connections, with godlike. And Philip claimed to be a god. Philip had already built a temple, the Philippion, at Olympia. Inside the gold and the ivory statues of his family stood equal with the gods. Philippi is a city that he named after himself, the godlike Philip. Alexander inherited this. Let's call it ready-made divinity. What is divinity? What is being divine? Now, that is godlike status. And this is common in the culture. This is a polytheistic culture where lots of gods. And so if you could claim divinity, you should probably have a big army. You should do heroic things. But it's, again, with the messaging. Alexander sleeps with a copy of the Iliad. The casket copy of his Iliad is close to him at all times. Why? What's in the Iliad? Stories about Achilles and the greatness. And he wanted to do better. And you can evaluate that on your own. But he viewed himself as the living reenactment of Achilles, a psychological force multiplier. How is he going to take over the world? Well, this is part of it. But not only does it affect his motivation, what about his army? When his army follows him, believing that he is godlike, you fight differently. When you believe your general is demigod, can't lose, if it's superstition, if it's religion, if it's piety, being pious, this all works. And Alexander inherited it, and he's using it well. Number 9, the survival of the fittest. He inherits survival of the fittest. He's got these assets. He's got some struggles to overcome. Now the blood. 336 BC is a transition that was not like a fancy coronation, not a smooth takeover. It was a purge. The survival of the fittest is a purge. What is a purge? In Macedon, the king was the man left standing in these times of transition. You're going to purge, you're going to clean house, you're going to get rid of people who might cause you problems. Alexander secured this inheritance by striking down every rival. He executed his cousin, the legitimate heir that Philip had stolen the throne from. Oh, Philip didn't exactly inherit the throne officially or smoothly. He stole it from his cousin, and so Alexander takes that guy out. Amyntas IV was his cousin. Alexander stole his life so that that wouldn't be a challenge. He executed other princes. He sent an assassin across to Asia Minor to actually kill the general Attalus, one of the rivals and someone that was possibly involved in the plot against Philip. But back in the palace, there's a personal twist on this purge. His mother, Olympias, settled a few scores. She cornered Philip's latest wife, the widow Cleopatra Eurydice. Cleopatra Eurydice supposedly was forced to hang herself over the crib of her murdered infant. Olympias orchestrated this. Olympias killed the baby, a baby that could have been a rival to Alexander. Reportedly, Alexander was furious about this, but it's a purge. He accepted the result. He eliminated his own kin to ensure that the army had exactly one master. This ruthless consolidation did work. It prevented civil war. It allowed Alexander to leave on his Asia invasion, well, partly with a terrified but unified ruling class of Macedonia. He taught them a simple lesson that loyalty is life. Treason is death. Number 10, the Launchpad. Alexander inherits the Launchpad. You can probably feel it to this point. The first move, before he turns east, before Alexander looks, he goes north. The Balkan tribes, what is the Balkan? The Balkan Peninsula tribes, that includes all of Greece to the south, but there's also Thrace, there's tribes that Philip had to deal with, and he did subdue them, but Philip's death was a chance for these tribes to rebel. Alexander had to secure this Balkan back door, so 335 BC, he makes sure he kept his father's alliances. He was inheriting like King Languorous, the king of the Agrianians. He tried to help, fix him up with a wife that would be in the family. But more significantly, at Mount Haemus, Alexander debuted his genius because the Thracians were there to set a trap. They had heavy wagons positioned on top of a steep hill, ready to roll down and crush the phalanx, like a bowling ball strategy. Alexander saw it coming, so he ordered his men to open ranks, but they couldn't do that. He gave a new command: lock shields. They lied face down, locking their shields over their heads, creating an armored ramp. And when these wagons rolled down on them and hit the ramp, bounced harmlessly over the shoulder, the soldiers, not a single man was killed. And he was able to pacify this northern frontier that his father had previously done well with, the Illyrians, the Thracians, the supply lines, because now it's going to allow the army to cross the Hellespont and invade Asia. That's what we've been trying to do this whole time. Here we stand, 334 BC. It's taken Alexander nearly 2 years. He was 20 years old. His father was assassinated. He inherited quite a lot, including significant struggles. But this was a young person with a dream. Alexander is now the operator of the most advanced military and political machine that the world has ever seen. It's a machine. Nothing that the Greeks had ever done is going to compare to this. He's got the siege engines, the engineers that can break walls, the hammer, the anvil, and the army formations. You know, Philip II had forged the sword for his son. Alexander is simply the first one to be able to swing it with total abandon and recklessness, or is it courageous? We need Aristotle's golden mean to help. And you decide. It's your timeless truth. He secured his inheritance, the hardware, the software, the power, the myth. And it's easy to believe with all of this success that he pulled, he's a god. But the weight of all of that, the inheritance, the divinity, could eventually crush him. You know that he dies at age 32, consumed by this machine that he inherited. He had the power to conquer. The guy's not going to lose, but he lacked the wisdom to know when to stop. Thank you for taking the time to learn something that matters in all of history, and that includes your history, some classical truth for your journey. Because kingdoms rise and fall, power fades, but virtue endures.